Rightio. Thank you for giving me some of your time again, Trevor.
Welcome, Ross.
Now, apart from the fact that you're holding a pamphlet there about vaccines being harmful to the public in past years, again, there's a lot of chatter on social media about, and I've seen the signs, and I've been asked to wear the mask going into the shop. I have an exemption, but I'll try to avoid the shop for as long as I can until, you know, I have to go and I need to do something or whatever, and then but like the shop I went into, they gave me a little badge saying I'm exempt. I felt silly. I shouldn't need to wear that anyway. It just seems that it wasn't apparently advertised by the government or mainstream media that if you're exempt, about exemptions, because a lot of people got abused and there were arguments about it, and like some people knew their rights that they didn't need to if they had a valid reason, and other people calling them out as Karens and whatever. A couple of them acted a bit silly, but that's beside the point. They had their rights not to wear it. They had valid reasons, you know, whether it be asthma or, like, God, there's got to be a couple of dozen valid reasons. Even though some people probably don't have those reasons certified by a doctor, the fact that the mask thing made people actually have to go and get it certified. Well, that's beside the point. Again, just to reiterate that you're saying that the government is not going to mandate vaccines.
Yep.
Right? Now, are they going to stop private companies from mandating it when it becomes litigious? Because some people may need to go through the legal system to go, mate, I'm not obliged to get a vaccine. I've got the exemption, and then they're still going to be discriminated against, because the Discrimination Act means that it needs to be, lawful action. So, are you, with the government point of view, are you going to force people to start getting litigious? Because you need to set clear guidelines and say, look, the government's not mandating it, and we don't want private individuals. If you have a concern about the virus or the vaccine or whatever, then you need to contact such and such a department and verify it, because there's been plenty of chatter on social media where people have contacted the health department and got fuck all of an answer. They're still just as confused as when they rang up as before they rang up.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess, a private company and a private residence has the same sort of freedoms as you as a private citizen have, and that's to choose and decide what approach you want to take and what rules. So the government's not going to mandate you as a private citizen to do one thing or not to do one thing, and in the same way we're not going to mandate a private company or a private property to do one thing or another thing. So that freedom cuts both ways.
Yeah. Well, what if Coles and Woolworths, because they both act as one, they're not really a competitor, they probably literally talk to each other, like, oh, we're going to raise the price on butter, this, whatever.
If they did that, that would be illegal, and they would.
How are you going to prove it?
In the same way that the ACCC proves cartel actions every year.
Most politicians that I've noticed go into politics and they're not really rich, but when they leave, they're millionaires. Like Obama, he wound up leaving office after 8 years. He wound up multiplying his wealth by 30 times. So, there's got to be a bit of inside trading there. Okay.
About that. Like I've said before, most of my colleagues at least have taken a pay cut to be there. I did, and I was pretty young. I was very young to be going into the game, and I took a pay cut. So I think when I look around and I think about, the ophthalmologist that's sitting there on the back bench probably getting like 2% of what they were previously as an ophthalmologist, and someone like Craig Laundy, who was in a pub baron family, is probably earning far less. But in terms of people, they've got to explain how they got their wealth. There's a lot of transparency about that. Obviously, each of us keeps a register and talks about incomes that we receive and any potential conflicts. That's all publicly accessible.
See, I'm a very open person. I'm not a very good secrets keeper. Like some stuff that's happened in my life, I'll take to my grave, but that generally doesn't come up in general conversation. Now, when it comes down to when I last talked to you, I mentioned the Defence Act. Right now, someone posted the PDF on that act, and I didn't see your name in the pro or the against. You probably weren't even in Canberra. So that was voted in. So foreign troops can now come onto our shore for just about whatever the government calls an emergency. God knows what the fuck that's going to be. You know, an old lady might drop a hat in the middle of a park and they'll go, oh, it's an emergency, they can call it in. Obviously that's a stupid reason, but whatever the government calls foreign troops in for, I might not call an emergency.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it seems very sad when the legislation, the way I read it, that there's no liability for foreign troops when they come here. So they can, if I had no liability, like the vaccine companies currently, they're putting out this vaccine with no liability, so they can experiment.
Is that a US thing? Is that because they're using the emergency powers over in the US?
Again, emergency powers. What is what I might consider to be an emergency might not be what other people consider an emergency.
That's the first thought I have in this piece of law. Do they define what a civil emergency or what a disaster is?
Not very well. It's a very broadleaf sort of understanding, the way that I read it.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be floods, could be God knows what.
Yeah.
But normally, like, we've had a fair few floods, and recently, 2011, 1974, whatever. We've recovered and we put our shoulder to the wheel as a community. We did it. So we don't need foreign troops to come in and do that. Why do we need that piece of legislation? I don't think we do, personally.
Yeah, no, as you said, I haven't voted on it, so I haven't read it in detail. I think about, for instance, I mean, we would send our troops to some of our nearby friends and neighbours when they've got sorts of disasters, both natural and man-made. I think about, for instance, the terrible floods that they had in Aceh province in Indonesia, or the cyclones that they've had in places like Vanuatu and Fiji. And then I think about the civil strife that they had in the Solomon Islands, you know, where we put peacekeeping forces in there, including soldiers, to keep the peace and to, you know, to stop rival family groups and villages from harming each other. I wonder if those countries, you know, asked to put in a provision like this to protect our troops from immunity in exchange for us giving them that sort of help and assistance.
Well, when you talk about immunity, that's like saying, I want to have a discussion with you, but I want immunity. So that's basically asking for impunity. I mean, I can do and say whatever I want because you can't say or do anything back. Yeah. That's no. Everything's got to be a two-way street. Everything. Otherwise, it's bias.
Well, I mean, there's some very well-established areas of immunity. For instance, they give lawyers immunity to keep the secrets of their clients when they're, you know, being prosecuted for different things. The lawyer can't be compelled to tell the truth around any private and legal discussions they've had.
Since when do lawyers and judges tell the truth anyway?
Well, I mean, you know, you might feel differently about it if you were relying on your lawyer to give you good advice.
If I'm ever hauled before the courts, I'll be representing myself.
Sure, but you can understand why that legal immunity happens. The other one's diplomatic immunity. That's very, very well established.
There's actually been movies about that where, you know, you get the people coming from foreign countries and they're real assholes, so they kill citizens of other countries because they have diplomatic immunity. Obviously,
let's keep it out of the movies. Maybe not Hollywood.
That's the far side of it.
The best way for us to describe what's really going on.
Well, how do we know life isn't imitating art or art isn't imitating life? Was that Warhol?
You've talked previously about the very low opinion that you have about politicians, and that's great. I love it, and I applaud you for having that. I'd say that, you know, one of the reasons that you and many Aussies do is because most of the silly stuff that people do and the mistakes that they made are found out. There isn't that sort of secrecy around it, and so, you know, a lot of those silly mistakes that politicians have made are out there in the public, and that's one of the reasons why people have such a low opinion of them.
And they don't get punished for it. You know,
I can think of
I've seen
politicians that have lost their jobs, lost their careers.
Not countless. I wouldn't say countless. There might be a few that have stood down deliberately. What about Cullen? What about Cullen? He like, I met the bloke and he talked about he forgot to give a key back to a rental truck or something. Right now, maybe my memory's not perfect on that, on what he said, but it was vaguely about he rented a truck and he forgot to give the key back, and he offered to post it back and so on.
Yeah.
I mean, we all make mistakes, but
Right.
yet he was raked over the coals for that.
Yeah.
And he got thrown out of his party. Pauline Hanson threw him out of her party. And again, I don't
Hang
like
on,
political
wait.
parties.
Killen?
Cullen.
Oh, Cullen. Oh, Cullerton.
Oh, Cullerton.
I thought
Oh,
you were
sorry.
talking about James Killen, the minister in the Menzies government.
Cullerton. Okay. All right. Cullerton. All right. Yeah. All right. Well,
Yeah.
see, I'm a dual
Well,
tradesman.
I don't know Cullerton. I hadn't heard that about Rod Cullerton's
Rod Cullerton.
situation, but doesn't that sort of disprove what you were saying? You were saying they get away with everything and that there's no accountability, and you've just given an example of somebody getting punished too much.
That's probably because he was speaking against the mainstream media and
But that's a side
political
thing, not
narrative.
a principles thing. I mean, the principle that you said is that politicians get away with stuff and there's no accountability and no cost, and then you immediately gave an example of a case where somebody paid what seems to be a very high cost.
Yeah, high cost for forgetting to give a rental truck a key.
Yeah.
What about the 28 names on the legislation of that document that that is being sealed by John Howard, Liberal? That was sealed by John Howard. That was brought up by Bill Heffernan in a I've seen that, but I've got it saved as one of my favourites. Not a favourite video because it's a good video, but where he mentions that sealed document is listed as next Prime Minister, judges, high-ranking people in the law officials that were being investigated by the federal and New South Wales police for pedophilia rings, and yet it all stopped because the federal police and the New South Wales State Police couldn't agree on how to go forward. Now, to me, instead of John Howard coming up and going, "Oh, I'll seal the document," he should have come up and gone to the federal and the state police and said, "Now you'll sort this out while we're sitting here right now and get on with it because it's for the good of the people, for you to stop pedophilia." But yet he sealed the document, and one of them was the next Prime Minister. So it says.
I don't know about that. Like, I haven't looked into it. I don't know, but I don't. Think
I'm
that
sure. I'm pretty sure I've posted that link and that video on your Facebook page several times.
You may have, but what I'm saying is I don't know that a Prime Minister can seal documents. I'm not sure that that's in there.
Or maybe you want to have a look at the video I posted.
Well, just because somebody alleges it on a video doesn't make it true.
He was a federal member of Parliament saying it in the chambers in Canberra.
Yeah, and you've just explained, and on many other occasions, how you don't think that all federal politicians tell the truth all of the time, and you've said that you've got a pretty low opinion of them. Allegations are raised, especially in Parliament, where again there's actually no liability attaches. So you've got parliamentary privilege inside of parliaments where you can raise allegations and you can say things, and there's no liability if you get it wrong in terms of defamation or
maybe that should be lifted. Maybe that should be lifted, so that as soon as someone says something in Parliament, then it needs to have evidence behind it, and then it should be investigated. Otherwise, you're just throwing red herrings fucking everywhere, aren't you?
Well,
and the truth will never come out because you're just throwing red herring after red herring after red herring.
Well, I guess it depends what you mean by the truth coming out. I would say that lots of my colleagues are in there all of the time telling truth, and it's really important sometimes to tell the truth that you can be protected against those things. And that's, I guess, a theme there, and a more general theme would be sometimes it's important to ask the questions and to say an allegation has been made. It doesn't necessarily mean you agree with it. It doesn't necessarily mean that you've looked into it and established all the facts and decided as a judge whether it's true or not. But
no one's a judge. No one's a judge. I make evaluations. See, now the evaluation of my observations tells me that, and a lot of other people that I talk to would agree, even if they don't agree with me politically, they go, there's something wrong in politics, but they can't put their finger on it because they're not doing because they've got 2 jobs, and they've got kids, they don't have the time to do the research. But they're still going, there's something wrong in politicians, they get paid too much, and there is corruption in there. They just don't have the time to research it. Because I'm on a pension and I get the time to cross-reference what people are saying. Obviously that document that Bill Heffernan mentioned, I can't get access to it. So how do we unseal it, Trevor? How do we unseal that document?
I'm not sure that the document is there. I'm not sure who sealed it and how. I honestly don't know. I could go into Parliament tomorrow and I could say there's a document and it's been sealed. But what if it doesn't exist? How do you prove or find something that doesn't exist? Philosophically, I don't know if that's the case in this instance. But I gotta tell you, I applaud the way that you and lots of Australians are really cynical about politicians. The frustrations that you express around politics and expressed around politics and democracy for 2,000 years, going back to when the Greeks, first experimented with types of democracy. It's supposed to be a a conflict of ideas and passion and dedication and service. It's supposed to be argumentative and frustrating on occasion, because that's the way that you draw out, a better future, and you test all of the different ideas. Lots of people find it really, really frustrating because they're only aware of their perspective, and they're not in a situation every day where they're exposed to lots of other different perspectives which might challenge it. And so they are absolutely 100% convinced that their experience and their perspective is the whole absolute 100% truth, and they get very frustrated and angry when they come up against ideas and people that sort of give them an insight that maybe their perspective and all of their experiences are only a fraction of what's going on out there.
Well, I'm open to having my train of thought changed by new information.
That's why I love having these chats with you.
You call me skeptical. I'd probably be more inclined to call myself realistic.
Okay.
Whereas the evidence for the amount of corruption on this planet via the ruling class is so blatantly obvious.
On the planet, absolutely. It's why I'm
not going to be.
in liberal democracy.
I'm actually not going to be sorry, because when democracy becomes corrupt, it eats itself from the inside, because they get too decadent and lazy, and the mass of the people get lazy because they go, "Oh, I'm okay. It's not affecting me." Well, it does, but I'm not going to be sorry when history repeats itself once again, when the ruling class gets so effing arrogant that the working class rise up and slaughter them. I would like to avoid that, because I'd like to see other things happen, because I'm a big advocate for punishment to the right measure.
I think it was, just trying to think, was it a Churchill quote where he said, democracy is the very worst style of government except for all of the other ones that have ever been invented or tried. That's a terrible misquote, I'm sure, but the sentiment is that democracy has a whole lot of flaws. The issue is all of the different and other forms of government that people have tried are much, much worse. Some of the things that you referred to in terms of the amount of corruption around the world and people feeling incredibly hemmed in by their situation is behind some of the huge momentous shifts we've seen over recent years. I mean, we saw the uprisings in the Arab Spring and so on in the Middle East, where people did get sick of ruling classes and a lack of democracy and a lack of equal opportunity to get ahead in their own lives.
See, now that's where we've got to have, all we need is this equality of outcome that the socialists and so on go on about. That's fake. Now, the way I observe it to be is the only real equality should be equality of opportunity and equality of recognition by the law.
Sign me up, Ross.
Well, I mean, more people I go to different places and meet them and talk to them about this voting online app, and having it secured that it's only Australians and so on. Each country can have their own one, and then you can have a delegation of people that are voted on this site to go to an international one to sort things out. And the internet is only as corrupt as the people who program it and run it. Otherwise, it would work quite well. So if the programmer doesn't put corruption in there or put a back door in there where someone can sneak in and corrupt it, then it's going to be relatively secure. Otherwise, the internet banking would have their bank accounts emptied overnight, wouldn't they?
Sure.
Right? So the internet isn't as corrupt as everyone thinks. It's only about the programmer, the programming, and the people running it. So everything I talk about is actually a possibility. It's only I don't have the money or the technical skills to be able to follow it through.
Yeah.
And even that you just said that, sign me up. Well, obviously I'm making some sense if I've got a federal member of parliament going, yes, sign me up to equality of opportunity and equality of recognition by the law. I simplify things. Now, the problem is the government keeps complicating it, right? The vaccine. They want to complicate the fuck right out of it. What for? For a virus that has a 99% recovery rate with a few side effects. Well, if the best vaccine I've seen advertised comes up as 95% successful, I'll still stick with Mother Nature, because I've still got a few more percent of recovery with Mother Nature. And the vaccine's not tried. There's no liability for the vaccine companies if I turn into a ball of blithering flesh. And there's a lot of pros and cons to it. But what I don't see ever is an open, honest, public debate and continuous. So the ABC has turned out, from every time I've seen debates on the ABC television, it looks very socialist to me.
Sure.
All the points of view.
It's a criticism levelled at the ABC quite often. But having said that, you know, in terms of vaccines and their efficacy, and I'm pretty sure that's been a rolling topic of conversation and discussion on pretty much every channel across pretty much every news stream, you know, around Australia and probably around much of the rest of the world for months now, hasn't it? How much?
Well, what about the censorship that Morrison is talking about with Google, and Google doesn't want to release its stronghold on its company? There's some sort of censor, and I haven't done the dive in details, but there's a site on the internet called Economics Explained, and they said if the government gets its way, or the local media here gets its way with Google, then all we're going to see is Channel 10, Channel 9, Channel 7 and Channel 2, SBS, going to come into our news feeds, and we don't get any other news feeds but what they want us to see. Now that's draconianism by censorship, if I've ever heard of it.
Well, the tech giants are not happy with the government at all at the moment over some of the things that we're proposing in that space.
Well, I think there's a fair few people on the planet that aren't happy with the big techs either.
That's what
I mean, the amount of censorship that, like, they shut down an American sitting American president, shut down his Twitter, his all connections, because he was supposedly inciting violence. My God, if you actually, if people stop watching that those mainstream media and actually listen to what he said and watch the actions of things and analyse it like a detective or someone seeking to put crime down. Yeah, there were fucking idiots there. There's no doubt about the left, right and centre. There were some violent people there. But again, I'm more of an advocate of the right punishment at the right time for the due course. So, but just to blame a president for inciting a riot just by saying go up and peaceably exercise your free speech and let them know you're not happy. So a few people took it too far, but they're going to blame the president. Then they've censored and this is a report, I haven't confirmed this, they said that there have been reports or articles saying that 70,000 conservatives have been censored as well. Well, there's been a number of videos that I've watched on YouTube, and I've saved them. They're getting deleted because they mention China and the corruption in China. So what I'm going to start doing now is literally recording it onto my phone and give it a different digital signature, and then I'll re-release it onto I'll make up a channel or something and just keep pumping it out until they knock that channel on the head, and then I'll start again. So I'm more of a there's an answers person. Mm-hmm. So if there's a problem comes to me, I'll find a way around that problem. A bit like Genghis Khan came up to the Chinese wall and he goes, well, I'm not going to mount that wall. He just rode around the fucking thing. And then he took Beijing, or whatever their capital was at the time. So there's got to be answers, and the politicians aren't finding them. They're not doing their job because they're the ruling elite, and they're becoming so arrogant. I wouldn't be surprised if you find another Martin Bryant coming out of the woodwork and just taking out politicians and going, fuck yous. You know, yous are a bunch of shit. I'd like to see someone do that more selectively and actually research who the corrupt ones are. Like, from what I understand, that Brandis bloke who's been a professional politician, been there all his life, and I think it's George Brandis. I would, if he was in front of me, I would find it very hard to resist literally pulling his heart out of his chest with my bare hands. He's, from all the articles and the video I've seen of him, he's a POS. You know what POS means?
No.
Piece of.
Oh, okay. Right?
Now that's the abbreviation on the internet, so we get away with it. And it's all becoming very frustrating, Trevor. So sooner or later, that water's going to boil out of that pot.
Maybe.
So I'm more into
At the same time,
cutting it off at the
people
pass.
must be getting something right here in Australia and abroad. People are living longer. They are wealthier. They are healthier. They are better educated. They're more
I don't know about the better
productive.
educated.
Well, they've attained a higher level of education than their fathers and their grandfathers and their mothers and their grandmothers and
So I didn't even
previous
I
generations did.
didn't even pass high school, and yet I can sit down and talk with someone who's got an IQ of 120 or a Mensa size fucking thing and have a reasonable conversation with them, and they're not going to be able to corner me into any sort of aspects where they're going to make me look silly because I keep it simple. So you don't have to be highly
I'm not talking
educated.
about any individual case. I'm just saying, to the extent that you can try to measure and compare these things, it appears that the current population has attained more educational outcomes than previous generations.
And they're getting very decadent and lazy.
And around the world,
They're believing the veneer of truth the government and the mainstream media puts out.
if you had to choose, if you were responsible for a group of people, Ross, would you prefer that they were suffering incredible hardships which made them mean, keen and skeptical, or would you prefer to have your group of people relatively prosperous if that meant a bit of complacency?
Well, see, this is where it comes back. If you're giving me the option, I would want that site, that format site, lined up so that I can hear and understand everything they're saying, and I would put it back onto them.
That's not the choice.
It's, well, no, it's not the choice because the government doesn't want that site because they would lose power.
Good to talk to you, Ross.
All right.
Good to talk to you, mate.
All right, so you're packing up?
No. But that's plenty of time. If and when there's an election held, we won't be able to have these chats as often in the middle of a campaign, right?
Well, I'll sniper you for a one-question hit and run job sort of thing.
That's fine.
All right, well, thanks for your time.
Good to chat, as always.